It starts with a quiet hum, an almost imperceptible shift in the air. Something is about to unfold, but no one quite knows what. Welcome to a story of secrets buried in the clouds, of whispered words that carry unexpected weight, and of revelations that will change everything. Before we dive in, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. Now let's unravel a journey that starts in the ordinary, but quickly spirals into the extraordinary. Liam Carter settled into the back seat of a sleek black sedan parked outside the towering headquarters of Aurora Airways, the airline he had built from the ground up. As the car pulled away from the curb, he found himself lost in thought, reminiscing about his childhood spent near a small regional airport, watching planes slice through golden sunsets. His father had been a baggage handler, his mother a check-in agent, and from an early age, Liam had been captivated by aviation. He had dedicated his life to transforming Aurora Airways from a single-used aircraft into a luxury airline that spanned multiple continents. The company prided itself on impeccable service and an unrivaled safety record. Yet behind the scenes, troubling rumors had reached his ears. Stories of an unhappy workforce, whispers of a toxic culture festering beneath the polished corporate image. Liam had tried to address these concerns through management, but the answers he received felt rehearsed, polished. Corporate speak meant to smooth things over rather than reveal the truth. He had a nagging suspicion that he was being shielded from reality. So he devised a plan. He would book a first-class seat on one of his own flights, blending in as an ordinary passenger. He wanted to see firsthand how his employees truly felt and how his customers were treated when corporate oversight wasn't watching. He selected Flight AA-107 from San Francisco to Seoul, an overnight journey where exhaustion and long hours might strip away the usual corporate filters. It was the perfect environment to uncover the unfiltered truth. By the time his car arrived at San Francisco International Airport, Liam felt a mix of excitement and unease. For this trip, he had shed the appearance of a CEO. Gone were the tailored suits and polished shoes. Instead, he wore simple jeans, sneakers, and a black hoodie, with a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. A small, unbranded duffel bag was his only luggage. Stepping out onto the curb, he let his driver retrieve his bag, murmured a quiet thanks, and walked into the terminal. It was an odd feeling, not being recognized, and yet there was something strangely freeing about it. As he strolled past the Aurora Airways check-in counters, he observed everything with a fresh perspective. The ground crew, dressed in their signature navy blue and silver uniforms, moved with a well-practiced rhythm. But Liam noticed subtle signs of tension, the stiff, rehearsed greetings, the brief flashes of wariness in their eyes before they forced polite smiles. When it was his turn to check in, a young male agent greeted him with a bright but somewhat mechanical, "Welcome to Aurora Airways. May I see your passport and itinerary?" Liam handed over his passport, relieved that it bore no indicators of his position. The agent typed into the system, eyes flicking over the details. "Ah, first class tonight. That's wonderful." His tone was courteous but lacked genuine enthusiasm. The boarding pass was printed and handed over with a practiced motion. "Enjoy your flight, Mr. Carter." There was a pause, just a fraction of a second, where the name seemed to spark something in the agent's mind. But just as quickly, the moment passed. The agent smiled politely and gestured toward security. Liam thanked him, slipping the pass into his pocket. As he moved toward the security checkpoint, he exhaled slowly. The anonymity was real. He had spent years building this company, and yet, without a title attached to his name, he was just another passenger. A few travelers gave him second glances. Perhaps they recognized him from a magazine cover or a TV segment, but no one approached him. It was exactly what he wanted. Passing through security was routine, and soon he found himself near the Aurora Airways VIP lounge. He debated whether to enter. It was known for its plush seating, hot towels, and an excellent buffet, but he ultimately decided against it. If he was here to experience the airline the way most passengers did, he needed to walk among them, not retreat into luxury. Instead, he wandered through the terminal, casually observing his airline's employees as they moved through their routines. He watched flight attendants arriving in small groups, their uniforms crisp, their expressions varied, some chatty and excited, others clearly drained from previous flights. Then, just beyond the boarding gate, he spotted two flight attendants engaged in a hushed conversation. One had deep auburn curls neatly pinned back. Her name tag read Elena. The other, a blonde with sharp blue eyes, was named Rachel. Liam lingered near a departure screen, pretending to check flight information while subtly listening in. He didn't know it yet, but the words he was about to hear would change everything. Liam chose to bypass the comfort of the Aurora Airways VIP lounge. Instead, he wanted to experience what the average traveler encountered. No special treatment, no lavish perks. Beyond the lounge's gilded doors, he wandered the bustling terminal, casually browsing the shops and quietly observing his employees in their unscripted everyday moments. As he neared the boarding gate, he watched the flight crew arrive in pairs and small clusters. Their crisp navy blue and silver uniforms stood in stark contrast to the hurried crowds of travelers. Some flight attendants chatted animatedly, sharing personal stories and laughter. Others looked drained, gripping their rolling suitcases with a quiet determination, as if summoning the energy for yet another long-haul shift. That's when he noticed Elena and Rachel. Elena, with dark curls secured neatly in a bun, leaned in toward Rachel, who sported a sharp platinum blonde bob. The two were engaged in a hushed conversation, casting quick glances at the forming line of passengers. There was something in their posture, a slight air of discontent, as if they were quietly judging each traveler who passed by. Liam adjusted his stance, pretending to study the departure screen behind them, hoping to catch fragments of their exchange. Rachel sighed, rubbing her temples. Ugh, another overnight flight to Seoul. These shifts are brutal. And guess what? We have VIPs in first class. Apparently management wants us to treat them like royalty. Elena scoffed softly. Yeah, good luck with that. If these VIPs are anything like the airline owner, what's his name? Carter? They're probably all the same. Arrogant, entitled. I've never met him, but I've heard he's a pain. Rachel shrugged. They're all difficult. The guy built this airline, so I guess he thinks he's aviation's gift to the world. You know what I heard? He hires diverse employees just for the image. But look at who actually gets promoted. It's all for show. Liam felt a sudden jolt in his chest. Was this cynicism just casual workplace venting, or was there a deeper, more troubling truth behind their words? He had always championed diverse hiring and had pushed for inclusivity, but had those efforts been nothing more than a corporate illusion in his employees' eyes? He forced himself to stay composed. He couldn't jump to conclusions, not yet. As boarding time approached, the airport came alive with the hum of last-minute announcements and the shuffle of passengers finding their places in line. First class had only a handful of travelers, which would give Liam plenty of opportunity to observe the true service experience. When the priority boarding call was made, Liam stepped forward. Rachel was stationed at the gate, scanning boarding passes with a polished but detached air. When he approached, she barely glanced at him before mechanically taking his pass. Then she did a double take. Her eyes flicked over his name, and for the briefest moment, hesitation crossed her face. "Enjoy your flight, Mr. Carter," she said, her polite smile never faltering. There was no sign of recognition. She had no idea that the very man she had been criticizing was now walking past her, stepping onto the aircraft. Liam kept his expression neutral and proceeded down the jet bridge. Inside the Aurora Airways first-class cabin, the scent of fresh leather and a subtle hint of citrus filled the air, a signature of the airline's luxury experience. Soft lighting cast a warm glow over the spacious seats, each adorned with a plush pillow and blanket. Liam slid into seat 1A, exhaling slowly as he took in the ambiance. He felt an odd mix of anticipation and unease. Minutes later, Rachel appeared, making her way down the aisle with pre-departure beverages. She approached him with effortless professionalism, offering a polite but detached, "Would you care for a drink before takeoff?" Liam accepted a glass of sparkling water. "All set?" she asked. He gave her a small smile. "Yes, thank you." Rachel nodded and moved on to the next first-class passenger, her demeanor the same, polite, efficient, yet devoid of genuine warmth. Meanwhile, just beyond the first-class curtain, Liam could hear the muffled rustle of carts and the low murmurs of flight attendants preparing for departure. A soft click signaled the overhead bins locking into place, and then the pilot's voice crackled through the speakers, welcoming passengers aboard. His tone was steady, calm, laced with a quiet pride in the airline. Liam felt a faint reassurance. At least the flight deck had maintained its professionalism, no matter what was happening behind the scenes. As the plane taxied to the runway, Liam shifted in his seat, momentarily lost in thought. He remembered the first time he had ever flown, just a boy sitting in a small Cessna, awed by the sheer magic of flight. The memory brought a wave of nostalgia. Back then, planes had been symbols of freedom, adventure, and possibility. Now, they were also arenas for corporate politics, hidden tensions, and unresolved grievances. He barely noticed the gentle pull of gravity as the aircraft lifted into the night sky. Once the seatbelt sign clicked off, Rachel returned with the dinner menus. Liam took his, scanning the options. Pan-seared salmon, braised short ribs, vegetarian risotto. The selections were refined, crafted to match Aurora Airways' upscale reputation. Still, he wasn't here for a gourmet meal. As Rachel took his order, he decided to test the waters. "How do you like working for Aurora Airways?" he asked, his voice light, almost casual. Rachel's eyes flicked to his just for a second before she gave a carefully measured response. "It's a job. It has its perks, but it can be stressful, especially on long-haul routes like this." Liam feigned mild curiosity. "I heard there's a new labor agreement in the works. Will that impact you?" Rachel pursed her lips. "We'll see. We don't usually get the full details until they're finalized. Things get decided for us." She kept her tone professional, but Liam caught the undercurrent of frustration, the subtle resentment of an employee who felt unheard by those in power. She thanked him and moved on. Liam leaned back in his seat, staring out the window as the plane soared through the night sky. Something wasn't right. His mind kept circling back to Alina and Rachel's conversation at the gate. Had his diversity initiatives failed? Had corporate middle management been favoring certain employees while leaving others behind? He had spent years crafting an airline built on excellence and inclusivity. But tonight, he was beginning to realize the perception from the ground didn't match what he had envisioned. And that disconnect could be more damaging than he had ever imagined. The meal offerings were elegant, but Liam reminded himself that he wasn't here for fine dining. As Rachel took his order, he decided to take a risk, testing the waters with a casual conversation. "So, how do you like working for Aurora Airways?" he asked, keeping his tone light. Rachel's expression remained neutral, but her eyes flicked to him with a trace of hesitation. "It's a job," she said, her voice polite but distant. "It has its perks, but long-haul flights can be exhausting." Liam nodded as if merely making conversation. "I heard there's a new labor agreement in the works. Will that change anything for you?" Rachel pressed her lips together for a moment before replying. "We'll see. We don't usually get the details until they're finalized. Management makes the decisions and we just deal with them." She thanked him and moved on. But Liam could sense her reluctance. She wasn't comfortable voicing her thoughts openly, at least not to a stranger. Yet, there was frustration beneath her words. A quiet sign that not everything was as seamless as the company claimed. As the cabin dimmed to match the midnight sky, the atmosphere softened into a hushed stillness. The gentle hum of the engines wrapped around them, the world outside, now nothing more than endless indigo. Liam flipped open a book, but he couldn't focus. Rachel's earlier words played over in his mind, her detached tone, the way she spoke about management making decisions for them. Was this just the voice of an overworked flight attendant? Or was there a larger, more systemic disconnect between corporate leadership and the people who made the airline function every day? Then there was Elena's comment at the gate. They hire diverse employees just for the image. But look at who actually gets promoted. It's all for show. Liam had always pushed for inclusive hiring, determined to reflect the broad range of cultures they served. But had his efforts come across as performative rather than genuine? He needed more insight before drawing conclusions. Sometime later, Elena passed through first class, conducting a quiet round of passenger check-ins. She carried herself with effortless professionalism, a balance of composure and confidence in every step. When she stopped at Liam's seat, he took a breath. "Excuse me," he said softly. "This is my first time flying with Aurora Airways. I've heard great things, but from your perspective, what makes it stand out from other airlines?" Her posture stiffened slightly, as though weighing how much to say. Management promotes it as a boutique airline. Personalized service and upscale experience. We're smaller, so we're supposed to focus more on individual passenger satisfaction. Supposed to? Liam echoed, watching her closely. She hesitated, then glanced around as if checking that Rachel wasn't nearby. Look, I appreciate some things about the job. The pay isn't bad for a boutique airline. Some of the routes are interesting, but not everything is as polished as the brochures make it seem. Liam offered a small smile. Thanks for your honesty. Alana dipped her head slightly. Let me know if you need anything else. Then she moved on, her movements just as poised as before. Liam leaned back in his seat, deep in thought. There was truth hidden beneath the surface. Frustrations carefully concealed behind professional smiles. 2 hours into the flight, dinner service began. Liam opted for the braised short ribs, which turned out to be surprisingly tender. As he ate, he discreetly observed Rachel and Elena whenever they thought passengers weren't paying attention. Near the galley, a hushed conversation reached his ears. Rachel sighed, voice barely above a whisper. I just don't get how he can be so clueless about his own employees. Doesn't the airline owner care about the work culture he's created? Elena let out a soft huff of frustration. Corporate loves to put on a show. Their whole diversity initiative, it's the same faces in leadership every time. It looks good in marketing, but real representation? That's another story. They hire diverse staff for frontline roles because it photographs well, but guess who actually gets promoted? Rachel exhaled sharply. Exactly. They talk about how Carter started from nothing, how he used to work alongside ground crews like an everyman, but I'm not convinced. At the end of the day, it's always about the bottom line. If you're not in the inner circle, you're invisible. Liam's grip tightened on his fork. Their words stung, but more than that, they unveiled a deeper problem. A widening divide between what the airline claimed to be and how its employees actually experienced it. Were Rachel and Elena just disgruntled workers, or did they represent a larger truth within Aurora Airways? If many employees felt this way, then it wasn't just an issue of perception. It was a crack in the foundation, one that could undermine everything he had built. His appetite disappeared. Pushing his half-finished plate aside, he sat back, staring into the dimly lit cabin. A mix of emotions swirled inside him: indignation, guilt, and something deeper: self-doubt. Rachel and Elena had no idea who he was. To them, he was just another passenger, another nameless VIP in first class. And yet, their unfiltered honesty had shaken him more than any polished corporate report ever had. He thought about Elena's Middle Eastern heritage and Rachel's small-town Midwestern roots. Had they faced subtle workplace bias? Had they been overlooked for promotions because of unspoken office politics? Liam had always believed he was building an airline that valued merit. But what if his vision had been compromised by unseen forces within his own company? The aircraft soared steadily through the night, uninterrupted by turbulence, but Liam's mind was anything but calm. At some point, he made a quiet trip to the restroom, walking through the dimly lit aisle. On his way back, he passed by the curtained-off crew rest area. From behind the fabric, he heard voices, low but impassioned. Rachel's voice carried through first. We're all just cogs in his machine. Elena let out a humorless laugh. Carter pretends he's one of us, but I've heard stories. Apparently, years ago, he laid off entire ground crews in the middle of contract negotiations. Some might call it good business, but that tells you everything about his priorities. Liam's breath caught. They're talking about me again, and worse, they're not wrong. He remembered that decision, a painful, desperate move during a financial downturn. He had offered severance packages, done what he could, but had it been enough? Clearly, the wounds still lingered. Liam closed his eyes for a moment, absorbing the weight of their words. He had come on this flight expecting to listen, but he hadn't expected to feel like this. What he had just heard wasn't the scripted feedback from executives. It wasn't a polished HR report. It was the unfiltered, unvarnished truth. And now, he had to figure out what to do with it. Liam sat in silence, his body present in his seat, but his mind 1,000 miles away. From the crew rest area, Rachel's voice carried through the hushed cabin. We're all just cogs in his machine, she murmured, her tone bitter. Carter acts like he's one of the people, But I've heard from older staff that he's ruthless when it comes to cutting costs. Elena let out a quiet scoff. I heard he laid off an entire ground crew in the middle of contract negotiations. Some say it was good business, but let's be real. It just shows where his priorities lie. Liam's fingers curled into a fist beneath his blanket. He knew exactly what they were talking about. Years ago, when Aurora Airways had been teetering on the edge of financial collapse, he had been forced to make brutal decisions. Downsizing had been a last resort, not a callous move. He had worked to provide severance packages, tried to soften the blow, but for those who had lost their jobs, it hadn't mattered. And clearly, for those who remained, the memories still festered. He closed his eyes briefly, absorbing the sting of their words. Had he built something only to become detached from the people who kept it running? Slipping back into his seat, he reminded himself of his purpose. He was here to listen. Confrontation could come later, if it was even necessary. His job now was to understand, to take in the raw, unfiltered truth and figure out how to fix what had gone wrong. But deep in his gut, a slow simmering frustration began to rise. Did they really see him as just another out-of-touch CEO? Outside, the first soft streaks of dawn began to break over the endless expanse of ocean, outlining the horizon in a pale glow. The flight attendants moved about the cabin, preparing for breakfast service. Liam accepted a plate of scrambled eggs and fresh fruit, offering Rachel a polite thank you. She responded with a brief nod, polite, professional, and distant. No warmth. She still had no idea who he was. Meanwhile, Elena was working in business class, moving with quiet efficiency. Across the aisle, Liam noticed a passenger, a frail, elderly woman, shifting uncomfortably in her seat. She hesitated before pressing the call button. Rachel responded first, kneeling beside her. Is everything all right, ma'am? The woman, Miss Leon, spoke in halting English. She had a headache and was out of medication. Rachel's professional mask flickered, just for a second, as if she wasn't sure how to proceed. Then she murmured, "Let me check with my colleague." She disappeared behind the curtain, returning moments later with Elena. Elena immediately crouched beside Miss Leon, speaking in a gentle, reassuring tone. She asked a few clarifying questions, her voice warm but efficient. "We have basic pain relievers on board. I'll check with the purser to make sure we're allowed to distribute them. Just one moment, okay?" Miss Leon nodded, visibly relieved. Within minutes, Elena returned with a small packet of medicine and a cup of water. She softly reassured the woman, who smiled gratefully. Liam watched the exchange, something shifting inside him. Even though Rachel and Elena were frustrated with corporate, even though they felt undervalued and unheard, they still took pride in their ability to care for passengers. It was a side of them he needed to see. Shortly after, Liam overheard another quiet conversation. Rachel sighed as she adjusted a stack of trays. "We need more bilingual staff. Half the time we struggle with non-English speakers, and management doesn't care enough to properly equip us." Elena shrugged. "They offer language bonuses, but apparently it's not enough. People who speak multiple languages always end up leaving for higher-paying airlines." She glanced back toward Miss Leon's seat. "It's a shame. She just needed a little extra attention." Liam sat still, absorbing every word. Beneath their frustration, there was genuine pride in their work. Yes, they carried resentment, but they also carried compassion. That complexity, the tension between disillusionment and dedication, only made Liam more determined. He needed to fix this disconnect. A crackling announcement from the flight deck interrupted his thoughts. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're expecting favorable winds, which means we'll be arriving in Seoul slightly ahead of schedule." The soft chime of the seatbelt sign echoed through the cabin, and the gentle hum of waking passengers filled the air. Liam's pulse quickened. Soon, the flight would land, and then he would have to decide. Should he reveal himself right here in Seoul? Confront Rachel and Elena now? Or should he wait until he was back at corporate, armed with a plan? As he weighed his options, another hushed conversation reached his ears. Rachel's voice was quiet but questioning. "I still can't believe some of the stories about Carter. You think they're true?" Elena smirked. "Which ones?" "Some people say he's a self-made visionary. Others say he's just a manipulator." Elena's expression turned knowing. "Look at our leadership. Mostly older white men, with a few token additions. You don't rise to that level without stepping on people along the way. Rachel scoffed lightly. Doesn't matter, we'll never meet the guy anyway. Liam's jaw tightened. He turned to the window, watching as the South Korean coastline emerged in the distance. A mix of anger, curiosity, and shame churned in his chest. This wasn't just two flight attendants venting. This was a reflection of something bigger, a sentiment that could be widespread within the airline. It was a wake-up call. But how could he fix it when his own employees believed he was indifferent at best and ruthless at worst? The seatbelt sign dinged, and the aircraft began its descent. Rachel moved through the first-class cabin, performing the final safety checks. "Tray table stowed?" she asked. Liam nodded. She returned the gesture, her face a polite mask, completely unaware of who she had just spent the past 13 hours discussing. If she only knew. And yet, part of him was grateful for this anonymity, because without it, he never would have heard the truth. The landing in Seoul was smooth, and a soft round of applause rippled through the passengers. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, thanking everyone for flying with Aurora Airways. Liam sat still as the aircraft taxied to the gate. His mind was already racing ahead. He had come on this flight expecting to confirm some minor issues. Instead, he had uncovered deep resentment, quiet cynicism, and a workforce that no longer believed in leadership. The question now wasn't if something needed to change. It was how fast he could fix it before it was too late. The plane touched down at Incheon International Airport, and a polite round of applause rippled through the cabin. Over the intercom, the pilot thanked everyone for choosing Aurora Airways, praising the crew for their dedication. As the aircraft taxied to the gate, Rachel and Alina moved with practiced efficiency, preparing for disembarkation. Liam felt a flicker of urgency. Should he reveal the truth now, or wait until he had a plan? He stood along with the other first-class passengers. Rachel was at the front, offering her standard farewell, her voice polite but distant. When Liam reached her, he hesitated, studying her face for any sign of recognition. Nothing. She gave him the same courteous, scripted farewell she gave every passenger. "Thank you for flying with Aurora Airways, Mr. Carter." Liam managed a small smile. "Likewise, Rachel." For the briefest moment, her brow furrowed. Had she wondered how he knew her name? Or had she simply assumed he'd read her name tag? Before she could react, Liam moved toward the exit. Elena stood by the door. As he gave her a nod, he noticed something different in her expression. Not recognition, but a flicker of curiosity. Had she sensed something? Neither woman spoke, and then, just like that, he was off the aircraft. The pressurized quiet of the cabin faded, replaced by the bustling energy of the terminal. As he waited in line at passport control, Liam replayed everything he had heard on that flight. Rachel and Elena's frustrations weren't isolated complaints. They were symptoms of something larger. If they felt disconnected and disillusioned, how many others did too? He needed to dig deeper. And maybe, just maybe, confront them with the truth. The next few days in Seoul were packed with business meetings unrelated to Aurora Airways, yet Liam couldn't shake what he had learned on the flight. Rachel's harsh dismissal of corporate's diversity efforts. Alina's biting cynicism about his leadership. Their perception of him as nothing more than a detached figurehead. Each night, after his official obligations, Liam sat in his hotel room, combing through internal company records. He pulled up the employment histories of Rachel Kim and Elena Farouk. Rachel had been with the airline for 3 years, Elena for 5. Both had impeccable records, excellent passenger feedback, multiple commendations, and yet, neither had been promoted. Not to senior attendant, not to training roles, not to any leadership position. Why? Liam dug deeper into their performance reviews. Rachel's direct supervisor had noted occasional tardiness, nothing serious. Elena's record was flawless. By all accounts, Elena should have been fast-tracked for a senior position. But she hadn't. Liam's stomach tightened. Had unspoken bias held them back? Had middle management blocked their growth? Was this what Elena meant when she said diversity efforts were just for show? The thought unnerved him. Liam made a decision. He extended his stay by 1 more day and arranged to return to San Francisco on the same flight route, hoping that Rachel and Elena would be scheduled again. It was a long shot, but if they were... It would be the perfect chance for an in-flight conversation. Or at least, a starting point. 2 days later, Liam arrived at Incheon International Airport, moving through check-in and security with ease. As he approached the gate, his pulse quickened. Would they be here? His eyes flicked to the group of navy and silver-clad attendants gathering near the boarding area. There they were, Rachel and Elena, chatting quietly, preparing for the flight ahead. Liam's jaw tightened. This was his chance. Boarding began, and Liam was among the first in line. Rachel stood at the gate, scanning passports. When Liam handed her his, she froze for just a fraction of a second. Her gaze flicked to his name, Carter. A slow blink, a subtle pause. Then, she recovered. "Welcome back, Mr. Carter," she said, her voice polite but tinged with something new. Liam gave a small smile. "Thank you." She hesitated again. "You flew with us a few days ago, right?" "I did." Rachel offered a tight smile. "Enjoy your flight." Liam took his boarding pass and moved down the jet bridge. As he stepped onto the aircraft, he spotted Elena at the door, scanning passengers. Her eyes landed on his name. Liam watched as recognition flickered in her expression. Not full realization, just a hint of suspicion. Neither woman challenged him, but the air between them shifted. By the time Liam settled into seat 1A, he could practically feel the tension. Would they talk about him again? Or had his presence changed everything? As the plane prepared for takeoff, Rachel and Elena worked in quiet tandem. Rachel brought warm towels and took meal orders. Elena offered pre-departure drinks. This time, Liam noticed something different. Elena's politeness remained, but her eyes were sharper, more alert. As she leaned in to collect his glass, Liam took a small risk. "It's good to see you again, Elena." Her throat bobbed subtly. "Thank you, sir. We strive to maintain high standards." Liam nodded. "I can tell, and it's not just me. Other passengers seemed pleased last time as well." Elena angled her head politely. "That's kind of you to say. If you need anything else, just let me know." Before she could move on, Rachel arrived with an amuse-bouche, still maintaining her cool professionalism. But something in her demeanor suggested she wasn't as at ease as before. Liam decided not to push further. Not yet. He needed to see if they would talk about him again, now that they had recognized his name. The flight had reached cruising altitude and the cabin settled into a quiet rhythm. Elena excused herself to assist in business class, leaving Rachel in first. Liam, pretending to flip through his magazine, waited. And then, just as he expected, the hushed voices began. From the galley, just a few steps away, he heard Rachel's voice, lowered but urgent. "Elena, I'm telling you, it's weird that he's back on our exact flight. There's something off about him." Liam kept his movements casual, standing and making his way toward the restroom, passing close enough to listen. Elena's tone was thoughtful but cautious. "Could just be a business trip. But yeah, it feels strange." Rachel exhaled sharply. "He recognized my name and yours. Remember? When he left the plane last time, he said my name like he was testing me." A pause. Then, in a hushed whisper, "His passport says Carter. Liam Carter. That's the same name as the founder." Silence. Then, a sharp intake of breath from Elena. "We would have known if it was him, right?" Elena muttered. "The real Carter is older. He's always in tailored suits when he's on TV. Not jeans and a hoodie." Rachel sounded less convinced. "Yeah, but who knows? The media filters everything. Maybe this is his way of going undercover." A soft, nervous laugh between them, but when Rachel spoke again, her voice had turned serious. "If it is him, we're screwed. We trashed him last flight." Elena sighed. "Yeah, we said everything. About management, about the diversity program." Another pause, then softer. Then again. "Maybe it's just a coincidence. If he were really Carter, he would have said something by now, right?" The conversation fizzled out, the two women falling into an uneasy silence. Liam took a slow breath, returning to his seat. His heart pounded. They had figured it out. Or at least, they were dangerously close. For the next hour, Rachel kept stealing uneasy glances in his direction. Elena, too, seemed more guarded, though her interactions with passengers remained calm. Finally, Rachel approached him, her voice carefully neutral. "Is there anything else I can get you, Mr. Carter?" Liam set aside the magazine he had been pretending to read. "Actually, Rachel, I'd like to talk with you when you have a moment." Her posture stiffened. "Of course, let me finish with the other passengers first." Liam nodded. "Take your time." 10 minutes later, Rachel returned, gesturing toward the galley. Sir, if you'd like to speak in private. Liam followed her. Elena was already there, arms folded, her gaze shifting between them, a mixture of caution and curiosity in her expression. Rachel cleared her throat. Is there an issue with the service, sir? Liam inhaled deeply. No issue, but I think we need to clear the air. Their faces paled slightly. Elena forced a small, nervous smile. What do you mean? Liam dropped his voice, mindful of the nearby passengers. I know you've been talking about Liam Carter, and I know you're starting to suspect that I might be him. Rachel's eyes widened, her mouth opened, but no words came out. Elena's posture sagged in disbelief. Wait, you're actually Carter? She whispered. He nodded. I am. Silence. The weight of the truth settled between them. Liam continued, and yes, it's true. I flew out on this same route a few days ago, incognito. Rachel still looked like she was processing the information. Liam's voice remained steady. I overheard your conversations. About me, about the airline, about diversity efforts. Rachel swallowed hard. I had no idea. If I had known. Elena placed a hand on Rachel's arm, as if steadying her. Mr. Carter, we weren't trying to insult you personally. We were venting about corporate issues. It's not that we hate the airline. Liam lifted a hand. Please, you don't have to apologize for speaking your mind. I'm not here to punish you. Rachel hesitated, her voice quiet. Then, why are you here? He met her gaze. Because I respect honesty. You gave me the truth. Unfiltered, even if it wasn't flattering. That's the only way this airline can improve. Elena's expression softened slightly. Rachel, still wary, asked, how can we be sure this conversation won't cost us our jobs? Liam's response was firm and immediate. Because I give you my word, and because I need people like you to help me fix what's broken. The tension in Elena's face eased just a little. So, what happens now? Liam glanced toward the passenger cabin, making sure no one was listening. We can't talk about everything here. But when we land, I'd like both of you to meet with me in private, through official channels. No consequences, just a discussion. I need to hear more. Rachel's eyes flickered with both relief and concern. All right, we'll do it. Elena placed a hand on Rachel's shoulder and nodded. Thank you, Mr. Carter. If we'd known who you were, we probably would have spoken differently. Liam managed a small smile. That's exactly why I had to do this undercover. They exchanged a look of mutual understanding. Rachel sighed deeply, shaking her head. This is still surreal, but okay. A passenger approached, asking for water. The moment was over. Liam returned to his seat, feeling the subtle quake of adrenaline fade. But in its place was something else entirely. Cautious hope. Rachel and Elena had been honest. Now it was up to him to prove that honesty mattered. As the flight continued, Rachel's demeanor slowly shifted. She was still professional, but now she occasionally made brief eye contact with Liam, as if to assure him that she wasn't holding a grudge. Elena remained composed, gracefully moving through the cabin, but when she passed Liam, she gave him a discreet thumbs up. A silent message. Stay the course. Despite everything, their frustrations, their doubts, they were still exceptional at their jobs. Their interactions with passengers remained impeccable, a testament to their dedication, no matter what concerns they had about the airline. Soon, the plane began its descent into San Francisco. Bright sunlight bathed the cabin, revealing the sprawling cityscape below. Liam's mind churned with possibilities. How could he fix what Rachel and Elena had exposed? Was it just a matter of promotions, or was the problem deeper, a systemic issue of fairness, inclusion, and corporate detachment? He resolved to dig deeper. But first, he needed that conversation. Once the plane taxied to the gate, Rachel and Elena resumed their usual farewells. But something was different. Their voices carried a hint of tension, an awareness that this flight had changed something. Liam waited until the last passenger had disembarked. As he reached the front of the cabin, he paused beside Elena. Remember, he said quietly, I'll be in touch. Elena gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Rachel, standing just behind her, did the same. There was no need for more words. They understood. Liam stepped off the aircraft, exhaling deeply. The weight of what had just happened pressed on his shoulders, but strangely, he felt lighter. This confrontation, while nerve-wracking, had been necessary. It was the first step toward bridging the gap between leadership and the employees who truly defined the airline. That evening, Liam sat in his dimly lit office, staring at his phone. Then, he made the call. The voice on the other end picked up. Mr. Carter? Margaret, it's me. I need a confidential meeting set up tomorrow morning. 2 flight attendants, Rachel Kim and Elena Farouk. They just returned from Seoul. Margaret Dawson, the airline's head of human resources, hesitated. Is there a problem? No, Liam assured her. It's not disciplinary. I just need an honest discussion about employee concerns. A pause. Then Margaret simply said, Understood. I'll arrange it. The next morning, Rachel and Elena arrived at Aurora Airways headquarters in downtown San Francisco. They looked out of place in their off-duty clothes, a stark contrast to the polished executives who roamed the halls. Rachel wore a simple blouse and slacks, her platinum blonde hair left loose instead of pulled back into her usual flight-ready bun. Elena had opted for a long, muted patterned dress, a far cry from the structured uniform she had worn just a day before. A young receptionist greeted them and escorted them down a quiet hallway to a private conference room. Moments later, the door opened. Liam walked in, dressed in business casual rather than a formal suit. No theatrics. No intimidation. Just a conversation. He gestured toward the long glass table. Thank you for coming. The 2 flight attendants exchanged a brief glance before taking their seats. Liam sat across from them. I meant what I said. There will be no repercussions. I just want to listen and understand. Rachel folded her hands in her lap, exhaling deeply. We appreciate that. But honestly, this is overwhelming. I never thought I'd be sitting in a room with the airline owner, telling him what's wrong with his company. Elena nodded, her expression measured. From the outside, it might not seem that bad, but there are real issues. Liam leaned forward, clasping his hands together. I want specifics. You both mentioned the diversity program, that it feels more like a marketing strategy than an actual effort. Tell me more. Rachel and Elena exchanged a knowing look. Then, Elena spoke first. The airline runs photo campaigns that show diversity. Women, people of color, employees from different backgrounds. But in reality, promotions still go to the same type of people, those who fit the corporate mold. Rachel added, it's not just race or gender, though that's part of it. It's also connections. People who are friends with managers or come from certain professional backgrounds get fast-tracked. Meanwhile, the rest of us wait for years. Liam pressed his lips together. I was under the impression that HR had a structured, fair system for promotions and raises. Are you saying that's being bypassed? Elena nodded, her tone firm. Yes. And it's discouraging. It makes people feel like no matter how well they perform, they'll never move up. Liam's jaw tightened. He had always prided himself on building an airline that valued talent over politics. Yet here were 2 highly qualified employees, both of whom had been overlooked for promotions, telling him that his airline wasn't what he thought it was. Rachel sighed. And then there's cost cutting. Liam met her gaze. Go on. Rachel hesitated, then spoke carefully. We understand that an airline has to be profitable, but frontline staff always seem to take the first hit. Then we see executives at lavish corporate events enjoying perks while we're being told there's no budget for better training or resources. Liam reached for his notepad, jotting something down. I hear you, and you're right, that would breed resentment. A memory surfaced, something a former mentor had once told him. Employees don't watch what leaders say. They watch what leaders do. And right now, they were watching a system that rewarded connections over performance, that poured money into executive retreats while frontline workers struggled for resources. That wasn't the company Liam had set out to build. And now, it was time to fix it. Elena's eyes shone with cautious hope as she studied Liam across the conference table. So what are you going to do about it? Liam exhaled slowly. I can't fix everything overnight, but I can start. He raised a hand, outlining his plan. Step 1. Bring in an external consultant to audit the promotion and salary review process, ensuring that advancement was based on merit, not favoritism. Step 2. Implement stronger language training programs and increase compensation for multilingual employees, so that passengers like Miss Leon wouldn't be left struggling for help. Step 3. Scale back unnecessary executive perks and redirect that money toward flight crew improvements, better training, better rest accommodations, and better support. Liam met their gazes. Most importantly, I'll establish a clearer channel for staff feedback. Right now, it's clear that you're not being heard. Elena and Rachel exchanged a long look, as if searching each other's faces for a sign of real belief. Rachel spoke first, her voice hesitant but sincere. "We support those changes, but we're just two flight attendants. There are a lot more voices out there." Liam nodded. "I know. That's why I want to assemble a staff advisory council, representatives from all levels of the airline. If you two are willing, I'd like you both to be on it." Their eyes widened in surprise. Elena was the first to recover. "That's an opportunity we never expected, but yes, we'd be honored." Rachel swallowed, then nodded, "Absolutely." Liam smiled gently. "Thank you. I know you have no reason to fully trust me yet, but hopefully our actions will speak louder than words." The conversation continued, moving from broad concerns to specific solutions. Flexible schedules for parents, better accommodations for crew on long-haul flights, more transparency in performance reviews so employees knew exactly what was expected for career advancement. Rachel revealed that many flight attendants feared speaking up, worried that voicing concerns might put their jobs at risk. Elena pointed out that employees from certain backgrounds were often typecast into specific roles, overlooked for leadership positions while others became the face of the airline. By the end of the meeting, the atmosphere had shifted. The tension had given way to something new, cautious camaraderie. Rachel and Elena left with genuine thanks, still processing how the man they had once criticized so bluntly was now asking for their help to reshape the company. Liam sat back in his chair, rubbing his tired eyes. The conversation weighed on him. But more than anything, he was determined to follow through. That afternoon, Liam called a meeting with HR and a select group of executives. He didn't reveal the full details of his undercover flight, but he made one thing clear. Aurora Airways needed a cultural shift. Some executives were startled. Others were defensive. One senior manager even tried to downplay the issues, saying, "Employee dissatisfaction exists in every company. It's not as bad as you think." Liam's tone was firm. "We're not here to protect a corporate image. We're here to make real changes, and I won't accept window dressing." Over the next few weeks, a series of initiatives rolled out across the airline. The new Staff Advisory Council was announced, with Rachel and Elena receiving official invitations, ensuring their positions were protected. An external audit of promotions began, evaluating if certain groups were being blocked from career advancement. A budget review reallocated executive perks toward resources for crew members. The rumors spread quickly. Some employees were skeptical, assuming this was just another corporate PR stunt. Others, however, were tentatively hopeful. In the midst of these changes, Liam scheduled one-on-one meetings with employees from all departments: baggage handlers, gate agents, pilots, and maintenance crews. He listened, and through those conversations he pieced together a more nuanced reality of Aurora Airways, its strengths, its flaws, and the gaps between perception and truth. Then came a key turning point. Margaret Dawson, the head of HR, entered his office one morning with a folder in her hands. The consultants finished their initial review. She said, her voice carefully neutral, "And you'll want to see this." Liam took the folder and flipped through the data on hiring and promotions. His chest tightened. The numbers didn't lie. The reports confirmed what Rachel and Elena had told him. Upward mobility for certain employee groups was significantly lower. Diversity efforts were strong at entry levels, but promotions were often funneled toward a select group, proving that the system was still favoring those who fit the corporate mold. Liam leaned back in his chair, jaw clenched. He had always championed inclusivity, but somewhere along the way, his values had been lost in execution. He looked up at Margaret. "We're presenting this to the board." She nodded. "I figured you'd say that." Meanwhile, Rachel and Elena stepped into their new roles on the Staff Advisory Council. They now sat across from pilots, ground crew, corporate managers, each representing different branches of the airline. Some council members were older employees, jaded by past corporate promises. Others were younger, eager to make a real impact. Elena spoke passionately about language training programs, using Miss Lang's experience as an example of why multilingual flight attendants needed better compensation and support. Rachel pushed for transparency in performance reviews so employees would finally understand what they needed to do to advance. After a particularly intense meeting, Elena caught up with Liam in the hallway. Can I ask you something personal? She said hesitantly. Liam paused, nodding. Go ahead. Elena studied him for a moment before speaking. Why did you do it? Liam frowned. Do what? She folded her arms. The undercover thing. You could have just sent HR or managers to investigate. Why put yourself through this? Liam sighed. Because when leaders walk into a room, people put on their best face. I needed to step into your world without any filters, and I'm glad I did. Even when it was hard to hear what you and Rachel thought of me. Elena looked down, her expression tinged with regret. We were harsh. I'm sorry. Liam shook his head. Don't be. You gave me the truth. That's exactly what I needed. For the first time, Elena smiled. A real smile. I hope you mean it, because if things don't change, we'll hold you accountable. Liam chuckled. Good. That's exactly what I want. For the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful about the future of Aurora Airways. Liam studied Elena's face as she hesitated, her expression uncertain. Why did you do it? She finally asked. Liam exhaled, leaning against the hallway wall. You mean going undercover? She nodded. You could have sent HR or managers. Instead, you went yourself. Liam sighed. I've tried that. People always put on their best show when they know leadership is watching. I realized I was too insulated. I wasn't seeing the truth. I needed to step into your world without any filters, to see it as it really is, and I'm glad I did, even though it was hard to hear the things you and Rachel said about me. Elena looked down, her cheeks flushing slightly. We were harsh, she admitted. I'm sorry. Liam shook his head. Don't be. You showed me the raw, unfiltered truth. That's exactly what I needed. For the first time, Elena offered a small, grateful smile. I hope things really do change, she said softly. I want to stay with Aurora Airways, but only if it becomes a place where people feel valued. Liam nodded, his voice steady. That's my goal. It'll take time, but we're on the right path. In the weeks that followed, small but significant shifts began to emerge. Rumors circulated that the next round of promotions was being handled more equitably. Rachel's name had appeared on the shortlist for senior attendant training, though she hadn't been officially notified yet. Elena, meanwhile, learned that her manager had been informed about a new bilingual pay bonus for flight attendants fluent in multiple languages. For years, she had been expected to assist passengers in Arabic, French, and English without extra compensation. Now, her skills were finally being recognized financially. These weren't sweeping reforms. Not yet. But they were proof that Liam was following through. Not everyone was pleased with the changes. Middle managers who had thrived under the old system grumbled about losing their privileges. Some complained that the Staff Advisory Council was interfering with business as usual. Even a few longtime executives began questioning whether these reforms were too drastic. Disrupting the airline structure too quickly could destabilize operations, one warned in a tense meeting. Liam listened, but he refused to slow the momentum. He knew that short-term discomfort was necessary for long-term success. And then came his biggest challenge yet: pushback from the company's senior finance officer. At an executive board meeting, Mark Ellison, the airline's chief financial officer, challenged one of Liam's biggest moves, cutting back on the executive retreat budget to redirect funds toward flight crew resources. We need to maintain executive morale, Ellison insisted, his gaze sharp. High-level strategy sessions are vital for long-term planning. If our leadership team isn't at its best, neither is the airline. Liam sat back, his expression unreadable. I think our flight attendants, mechanics, and gate agents are also vital, he replied calmly. We can have a more modest retreat. Improving employee satisfaction across all departments is a better investment than an extravagant corporate getaway. Ellison pressed his lips together. With all due respect, he said carefully, we risk losing the upper hand in negotiations with potential partners. They expect a certain standard when attending these events. Liam didn't blink. Then we'll handle negotiations differently. But I won't sacrifice the well-being of our frontline staff just to impress investors. A long silence stretched across the table. Ellison didn't look convinced, but the rest of the board did. The motion passed. The funds would remain earmarked for crew improvements. Word of Liam's decision spread quickly. One afternoon, Rachel found a small envelope in her employee mailbox. Inside was an official letter. She had been promoted to senior flight attendant for transatlantic routes. Her eyes stung with tears as she read it. She had worked for years without any real hope of advancing. Now, she was finally being recognized. When she told Alina, her friend beamed with pride, though she wasn't surprised. "You deserved this a long time ago," Alina said. A week later, Alina received her own letter. Her bilingual pay bonus had been approved. For years, she had felt invisible. Now, her skills and contributions were finally being acknowledged. She stared at the letter in disbelief, then immediately called Rachel, her voice shaking with excitement. Momentum was building. With the airline's culture rapidly shifting, Liam knew it was time for a company-wide announcement. A town hall was scheduled, live-streamed to employees worldwide, from pilots and flight crews to mechanics and administrative staff. Liam stood on a small stage in the company's headquarters auditorium. The seats were filled with staff, cameras capturing his address for those watching from distant airports and offices. He took a deep breath. "I'm here to announce changes that some of you may have already heard rumors about." A ripple of murmurs spread through the audience. Over the past few weeks, we've been re-evaluating how Aurora Airways handles promotions, pay, and employee concerns. And I want to be honest with you, this wasn't done from an office. This was spurred by conversations I had while flying undercover as a passenger. More whispers. Liam continued, "I learned a lot. Some of it was hard to hear, but it was necessary. And now we're taking real steps to ensure fairness, inclusivity, and respect throughout this company." He detailed expanded language compensation, the formal staff advisory council, an external audit of promotions, the reallocation of funds to support frontline resources. Some employees nodded in approval. Others remained skeptical. But change was happening, and for the first time in a long time, Aurora Airways was moving forward. A few executives in the front row offered polite applause, but the real test was in the audience. Liam took a breath and motioned toward Ava Patel and Nora Hassan, who sat near the center. "I want to introduce two of the voices that helped spark these changes," he said. The room shifted. Ava and Nora exchanged a look before standing. Both women looked self-conscious yet proud. Liam continued, "Real change isn't just about policies, it's about culture. It's about how we treat each other every day. Let's make Aurora Airways a place where people from all backgrounds feel valued, a place where honesty is welcomed, where we work together to build a better airline, not just for ourselves but for our passengers." A moment of silence followed, then applause. At first hesitant, then growing stronger. Ava and Nora suddenly found themselves at the center of a wave of clapping employees. Some were curious, others were energized. Even those who had reservations couldn't ignore the shift in atmosphere. A hush of possibility settled over the room. After the town hall, Ava and Nora were immediately surrounded by flight attendants and ground staff. Some offered praise, others asked hard questions. How will the council actually work? Will this include pilot scheduling? What about pay equity for ground crews? Ava and Nora did their best to answer, explaining that the council was in its early stages, but it would be open to broader input. Days turned into weeks. The Staff Advisory Council formally took shape, with monthly meetings scheduled. Liam frequently dropped by unannounced, proving that leadership was genuinely engaged, not just dictating from the top. Ava focused on discussions around flight attendant scheduling and mental health resources. Long-haul flights were taking a toll, and she wanted that acknowledged. Nora pushed for better passenger communication strategies, working to implement bilingual announcements and visual aids for non-English speakers. One meeting broached a more difficult topic: racial bias in hiring and promotions. An external diversity consultant joined the council, leading training sessions and encouraging open dialogue about unconscious prejudice. For the first time, Ava admitted that her own past cynicism stemmed from feeling unseen as a woman of color from a working-class background. Nora spoke about the struggles of balancing respect for her Middle Eastern heritage with corporate expectations of how a flight attendant should look and act. Liam listened carefully. He wanted every employee to understand that acknowledging bias wasn't about assigning blame. It was about removing barriers and creating a culture where everyone could thrive. Not everyone welcomed the changes. Some employees resisted diversity training, complaining that it was a waste of time. But Ava and Nora pushed forward, encouraged by Liam's unwavering support. One quiet afternoon, Liam sat in his office, flipping through the latest staff satisfaction reports. For the first time in years, they showed a modest but noticeable increase in morale. A knock on the door broke his concentration. Ava and Nora stepped inside, their faces carrying a mix of nerves and excitement. Nora spoke first. "We just got word from the union rep. The next contract negotiations might include your proposals, things like clearer promotion pathways and better rest accommodations for flight attendants." Liam smiled. "That's fantastic. I hope the union sees that we're genuine this time." Ava nodded. "I think they do. It's not just talk anymore. You've already started implementing policies." Liam leaned back, exhaling slowly. "Good. We still have a long road ahead, but this is a start." The relief in the room was almost tangible. Ava and Nora exchanged a glance, remembering how they had once whispered in the galley, criticizing Liam Carter for being out of touch. Now, they stood before him, actively shaping company policy. As they turned to leave, Liam called after them, "Thank you." They stopped. He met their gazes. "Not just for your feedback, but for caring enough to share it. We wouldn't be here without you." Ava's eyes shone with unshed tears. "Thank you for listening." Time moved on, and the narrative continued to evolve. A year after Liam's undercover experience, Aurora Airways had become a more transparent and cooperative airline. There were still challenges, but progress was undeniable. Promotions were being distributed more equitably. Training programs were refined and expanded. Employees felt freer to voice concerns without fear of retaliation. Passengers, sensing the improved morale, left higher satisfaction ratings. Ironically, the very changes that Mark Ellison had fought, cutting back executive perks, shifting money to frontline staff, had resulted in higher employee retention, better service, and increased profitability. One afternoon, Liam sat by his office window, staring out at a departing aircraft, lost in thought. He often reflected on that fateful flight to Seoul. He remembered the swirl of emotions as Ava and Nora had criticized him so openly, how their words had stung. But in the end, their honesty had forced him to confront reality. Whenever he saw Ava walking through headquarters in her new senior flight attendant uniform, or Nora leading a multilingual passenger assistance program, he felt a surge of gratitude. Their unfiltered words had changed everything. For Ava, the journey had taught her that not all corporate leaders were out of touch. For Nora, it had renewed her passion for making the airline a more inclusive and welcoming place. And for Liam, it had proven that real leadership wasn't about making speeches from a corporate office. It was about stepping down, listening, and doing the work. Liam had never forgotten the sting of those overheard words. What had started as an uncomfortable truth had become the catalyst for transformation. Now, every time he saw Ava Patel walking through headquarters, wearing her senior flight attendant insignia, or heard Nora Hassan making bilingual announcements on a departing flight, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. Their honesty had not only changed Aurora Airways, it had changed him. Ava, for her part, had come to respect Liam's leadership. She had once believed all corporate executives were out of touch, but now she saw a leader who was willing to roll up his sleeves and tackle hard problems head-on. Nora, too, found new purpose in her career. She had always been passionate about cultural inclusion, but now she had a voice in shaping policy. And for the first time, she trusted the company's direction. But the ripple effect didn't stop with them. A pilot from Kenya advanced into a managerial pilot role, thanks to the airline's new, more transparent promotion system. A Latina ground supervisor was finally approved for specialized training, making her the first female ground operations manager at one of the airline's busiest hubs. Across the board, employees from historically overlooked backgrounds realized their voices carried real weight in this new era. Ava and Nora had once felt like two frustrated employees venting in a galley. Now, they understood the magnitude of what had happened. Their unfiltered conversation at 35,000 feet had sparked a sea change. Their doubts and frustrations had helped Aurora Airways become more equitable, supportive, and united. And ironically, it had all started with an undercover boss booking a VIP seat on his own airline. No polished management report could have uncovered the truths that honest employees had spoken in hushed whispers. The transformation wasn't perfect. No organization changes overnight. But the conversation had begun, and hearts had opened. Liam still flew frequently, sometimes incognito, but more often publicly. There were no more disguises. Now when he walked through the cabin, he was greeted with real conversations, not forced smiles masking frustration. Passengers, too, could feel the difference. Aurora Airways wasn't just a luxury airline anymore. It was an airline that genuinely cared. Whenever Ava or Nora crossed paths with Liam during a flight, they shared a knowing nod or a friendly chat. A simple exchange, but one full of meaning. The memory of that first overheard conversation, if these VIPs are like Carter, they're probably stuck up, no longer stung. Now it carried a strange fondness. It was a symbol of how honesty can spark real change. A reminder that sometimes the hardest truths lead to the most necessary transformations. Aurora Airways became a legend within the aviation community. A once flawed company, rumored to be rife with hidden biases, was now held up as an example of evolving inclusivity and fairness. Passengers told each other stories about the airline that had once been on the verge of complacency, only to turn itself around through listening and action. In first class, business class, and economy alike, Nora's voice filled the intercom, welcoming travelers in multiple languages. In the aisles, Ava led her team with confidence, ensuring smooth flights and mentoring newer attendants. Both women, in their own way, carried the new banner of Aurora Airways. And Liam? He often reflected on the journey. He had started his career in love with the idea of soaring machines glinting against golden skies. But it had taken a rude awakening to realize something. Even the most polished aircraft can have hidden cracks, if no one is paying attention. And sometimes to truly own something, you have to let others show you how it really works. Aurora Airways soared higher than ever, not because of a marketing rebrand, but because of genuine camaraderie, empathy, and a commitment to leaving no voice unheard. Liam had once built an airline, but this was something greater. This was an airline where everyone could rise, and that was a legacy worth flying for.